Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 12th of April 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, the weather in Plymouth is wonderful. Blue sky and sunshine today. We've got reports of sun also in Pembroke and West Sussex, but Glasgow, unfortunately, is looking a bit grey, cold and rainy, we feel, for those north of the border. Well, we're going to kick off with the news today by an update on Guy Taylor. Extraordinary events in Aberystwyth Court yesterday. We seem to have got to the bottom of what actually went on, but we can tell you that at the moment Guy Taylor is imprisoned in Swansea Prison for 7 days. This is as a result of a charge of contempt of court. Well, this is the events which we're describing, the events of a madhouse. First of all, Guy was accused of a minor public order offence, which was supposed to have taken place in Welshpool some months ago, although there was never any proper notification of that offence, nor, as we will see, were any proper court papers served. However, Guy and his wife Linda went into court yesterday to see what was going to take place and to challenge proceedings. But in the event, Guy ends up in court. He's asked by the clerk of the court if he pleaded not guilty, to which Guy replied, no, there was no case to answer, which, according to members of the public present, the clerk of the court became, quote, demented, unquote, and accused Guy of contempt of court. And at that point, the clerk also called the police. Guy's taken to the cells, excuse me, and then something extraordinary happens. There's a change of magistrates from the morning session to the afternoon session. And what then happens in the afternoon is a trial takes place without Guy being present. He's found guilty of the minor public order offence and he's given a fine. We do not know what that fine was. And later in the day, Guy's brought back into court to face the contempt of court charge. And members of the public present said that a court official gave evidence that Guy had said things in the morning to the clerk that was simply not true. And they said that this was clearly perjury. But as a result of that charge, Guy was given 7 days in prison. Mike, it's difficult to know what to say on this because all the reports we've had from members of the public who were present and speaking to Guy and Linda Taylor are that it was simply outrageous what took place in that court. And clearly the magistrates were not in control, but this particular clerk, a gentleman, seemed to act in a highly provocative and very strange way.
It seems to me, Brian, that for as long as there are only individuals like Guy standing up and making a stand, that there's the possibility that this type of thing is going to happen. What we need is more and more people actually standing up and saying this is unacceptable.
Well, that's true, Mike. Of course, the other thing people can do if the thought of standing up to be counted in court is a bit too frightening is, of course, you can turn up to see justice being done, because we know, of course, that many of these actions cannot take place if there's sufficient numbers of the public present. But this is the state of justice in Britain in 2016. We are going to say from the UK column, it's pretty clear to us that justice in Britain has nearly broken down. There is no reliable justice unless you are a member of the elite political establishment, when of course you are above the law and can do as you please. And we're going to be seeing a bit more of that in today's news.
They're asking in the chat box the name of the clerk. It was Michael Cray, is that right? Was it Michael Cray?
We understand it was Mr. Cray, yes.
Yes, okay. Right, finance then. Goldman Sachs has now become the latest of the big banks to pay a huge fine for defrauding investors. In this case, it was over the mortgages, the subprime mortgages. And what they did, of course, was that they advised people to invest in countrywide so-called high-quality mortgages. And of course, these were given a AAA rating by the bank. But unfortunately, these weren't so good. So, for example, the bank's Goldman Sachs head of due diligence saw that report, and he sent a short email basically saying, if only they knew. So, well, they found out soon enough, and lots of people lost lots of money. Goldman Sachs didn't lose lots of money, of course, because having given the advice that people should invest in those mortgages, then Goldman Sachs began a process of betting against those mortgages, and they made millions and millions, if not billions, of dollars in profits. So they have now agreed to pay a $5 billion fine as a result of this. To put that in a bit of perspective, JP Morgan, they had to pay out $13.3 billion, Bank of America $16.6 billion, Morgan Stanley $3.2 billion. Of course, nobody goes to prison.
Well, of course not. This is a point I'm making, Mike. These people are simply above the law.
Indeed. So that's Goldman Sachs. This, of course, is the bank that provided the governor of the Bank of England. And, of course, they've also provided some of Cameron and Osborne's closest advisors. Just moving on, the World Bank, this really is a sign of the global economy more than finance itself. But, of course, World Bank taking full advantage of that. They are now lending, particularly to the so-called emerging markets, more money than they have done since the crisis in 2008. And they're saying as developing countries continue to face strong economic headwinds, demand for lending from the World Bank has risen to levels never seen outside a financial crisis. Well, perhaps that's because we're in a financial crisis. But anyway, during 2015, they lent $42.4 billion, and that's up from $40 billion in 2014. Now, that doesn't seem like a hugely significant rise, but where it becomes interesting is that so-called middle-income countries, the loans went from $14 billion in 2006 to $23.5 billion in 2015. Now, of course, alongside this is the usual IMF rules, which mess about with currencies and whatnot, which mean that people end up in debt forever, but they are still taking these loans, unfortunately. But at least, well, who are these people? But we've got a former Fed advisor suggesting that they've got a plan for change at the Federal Reserve Bank, at least.
Sure they have, Mike.
I'm sure they have. But this is a former Federal Reserve advisor. He advised Bernanke and also Yellen, but up until 2012. And he said that a lot of people would be stunned to know that to the extent to which the Federal Reserve is privately owned, and he's calling for the Fed to become a fully public institution. Unfortunately, he thinks that would make it like other central banks around the developed world. Well, perhaps, and maybe not, because the Bank of England, although owned by the taxpayer, is absolutely independent operationally. So what difference does it make? So he wants to see 12 regional Fed banks brought fully into government, and then the process of selecting bank presidents to be changed, and also give them limits on the terms for Fed officials. And this is the organization that he's working with, the National Campaign for a Strong Economy. They're called Fed Up, and they describe themselves as being powered by the Center for Popular Democracy. And once you start looking at them, you could run into the usual.
Soros, I would imagine, Mike,
absolutely, you run into the usual list of NGOs, and Soros being one of them. So, interested to know if anybody wants to do a bit of extra research on that.
Well, I hope they will. I thought the logo of the World Bank there was, or the icon that the World Bank was using there was, all the flags were nicely arranged in an eye on that.
Absolutely. A bit of humour here, I suppose, but David Cameron is up for sale on eBay. I'm sure most people have seen this already. I have to say I'm slightly disappointed. I mean, I took this screenshot at about 9 o'clock this morning, so I'm pretty disappointed about the amount of money that he's getting, that he's commanding. At least £65,900 was the bid at that point. It was interesting to see that he is the description is 4 parts or not working.
Yeah.
So he is a used item. 4 parts are not working. Used Prime Minister, no longer needed. Needs a bit of TLC. No box or instructions. Buyer must collect. Seller not prepared to touch. Item. So there you go. I can't blame the seller for not being willing to touch the item.
We can have a laugh about this, Mike, and it's certainly humorous. But what a state of affairs that we've now got Britain being advised to go into the European Union by David Cameron, a man that people think is so useless. They're trying to sell him. They should be giving him away, really.
Well, so we've had a petition to stop him coming back into the country. We've had a petition for a vote of no confidence in Parliament. We now have him being sold on eBay. It's pretty clear that people are making their feelings known,
which is good. Ridicule is good in this case. I think keep at it.
Absolutely. Okay, another day, another military exercise, this time in Estonia, and 6 NATO allies taking part in that. 1,000 allied soldiers taking part in Estonia's annual Spring Storm military exercise in the next couple of weeks. And this will be the Estonian Defence Force's largest training exercise this year, so right up against the Russian border, of course. 6,000 personnel, well, we'll see how that goes, but yet another military exercise on Russia's borders.
Maybe it'll be one of the last ones we see as NATO, Mike, as the EU military integration comes in. I think we can start seeing NATO gently slid to one side in Europe.
Indeed. Now, over the last couple of weeks, we've mentioned this, but never sort of looked at it in detail, the issue of the colour revolution in Brazil. We now have the vote this is a committee of the Congress of Brazil. They have voted 38 to 27 yesterday to recommend the impeachment of the president, Dilma Rousseff. And this is because they allege that she broke budget laws in support of her re-election in 2014. So that was yesterday. That was a committee. That will now go to the full Congress on Sunday, this coming Sunday. And if 2/3 vote in the full Congress on Sunday, then it will go to the Brazilian Senate. And if the Senate then decides that would just be a simple majority, there's no percentage requirement there to put Rousseff on trial, then she will be suspended for 6 months while the Senate puts her on trial. Now, there has been this colour revolution going on in Brazil for several months. Allegations of fraud and corruption. Not on the scale of Britain, but anyway, they are trying to get rid of their government. And over the last few months, there have been allegations of foreign involvement in this colour revolution. CIA was one such allegation which the organisers of the colour revolution deny. But as Wayne Madsen is pointing out in this article here, Langley's latest themed revolution, the Yellow Duck Revolution in Brazil, he says the main coordinators of these protests are found in Brazil's largest corporate federations and corporate-owned media conglomerates, and all of them have links to domestic non-profit organisations like To the Street, a typical Soros appellation, and Free Brazil movement, in turn funded by the usual suspects of the National Endowment on Democracy, US Agency for International Development, and Soros Open Society Institute. So that's going on in Brazil. In parallel, we have similar types of operations in South Africa, and of course this article suggesting that these protests that have been springing up in South Africa are sort of linked to historical apartheid and so on. But of course, whenever you get NGOs trying to incite this type of behaviour in these countries, they poke the sorest spots with the stick, and so that's perhaps a fair comment from The Guardian, but nonetheless, it's outside interest. And even in India, in India they don't really have this kind of operation going on just yet, but Indian government coming under strong pressure from the United States government to separate themselves from China in particular. And of course, we have the common purpose aspect going on in India as well. So India under a bit of pressure, and as has been highlighted in the chat box, this is an attack on the BRICS infrastructure. Well, we'll see how it pans out, but Brazil suffering the hardest at the moment.
Interesting, Mike. We've got these colour revolutions being stoked up all over the world. This is subversion, isn't it? Coming into a nation state in order to break it down. And we're seeing the internet being used as internet and social media being used in a very big way to drive those events.
Well, that's why the security service is putting so much effort into following social media at the moment, because they want to understand the effectiveness of their own operations.
I totally agree with that, which leads us nicely into what our special intelligence services are up to. And a very interesting article here in The Guardian: UK Special Forces and MI6 involved in Yemen bombing, report reveals. Now, this is actually a report on information that appeared in Vice, which we'll come on to in a minute. But some very interesting things coming out of this. So UK Ministry of Defence said the UK does not provide any military support to the US campaign of remotely piloted aircraft system drone strikes on Yemen. That was a statement they made a little while ago. What's coming out in the Vice News report is that British personnel serving in Yemen said the Special Reconnaissance Regiment, Special Forces unit seconded to MI6, were responsible for training Yemen forces fighting Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP. And secondment also allowed British military personnel to help with the drone strikes, but under the aegis of intelligence operations controlled by the Foreign Office, which is responsible for MI6. So the meat of the report by Vice News, which is very, very detailed, and we'd encourage people to read that, is clearly saying that once again the British government has been lying, and the British government's been fully involved in providing special forces and intelligence in order to facilitate the American drone strikes. So this is the main article. It's very long, but as I say, it's well worth reading. And the story relates back to May the 6th, 2012, when there was a drone strike on Fahd al-Quzo, who was the field commander for Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And in that strike, a 19-year-old student died. So we have yet another drone strike which is killing innocent people. What the report goes on to say is that Vice News, following a tip-off, can talk to the systematic collaboration between British special intelligence and the CIA to degrade Al-Qaeda through the combination of special forces and drone strikes. And in one of the reports, CIA praises the British for their most important contribution, and it says on one occasion their intelligence allowed an Al-Qaeda operative's car to be tracked. This was quite unique. The CIA official explained it was something we didn't have. We can then go through to a comment by the UK Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, Hugh Robertson. He said drone strikes against terrorist targets in Yemen are a matter for the Yemeni and US governments. However, following interviews with more than 24 current and former British, American and Yemeni officials, Vice News reports that UK played a, quote, crucial and sustained role with the CIA in finding and fixing targets. So the British government just continue prepared to lie. And we'll put in this quote here from David Davis. If I can find this, he says, if we know we're handling intelligence over which will be used in a killing, then we ought to be confident that it meets our own rules and guidelines. If there are deaths of civilians, there's a moral and legal problem. Well, there certainly is, because of course the British government is absolutely lying through its teeth about activities overseas which are simply killing innocent people. So let's just jump back a couple of days to the Mail on Sunday, which had a really excellent two-page article. Here it is, Britain's top secret kill list. We're on to the same subject. This is how GCHQ and the Serious Organised Crime Agency have been working together to provide intelligence for drone strikes in other locations. And we've got David Cameron inserted there because back in 2015, the 9th of September, he actually said that he would block Parliament from assessing his secret kill list of British jihadis fighting for Islamic State. So here we can see David Cameron prepared to run a government lying about the use of British intelligence to run these drone strikes. He's going to cover up the kill list. What we've got is David Cameron, it appears single-handedly, Mike, simply authorising who is going to be killed in the world because presumably David Cameron doesn't like them. Well, this is some of the meat of it, because let's bring in the heavyweights. Here we've got Robert Hannigan, director of GCHQ. He's talking about his own organisation, but as the bad guys, these adversaries work in secret, so too must GCHQ. We can't reveal publicly everything we do because we're secret, but we're fully accountable. And then he boasts that we're subject to one of the most stringent legal and oversight regimes in the world. Well, the weakness here is, of course, the GCHQ is overseen by the very corrupt government we've just identified as lying in the first place. But he's reassured, apparently, by parliamentary scrutiny through cabinet ministers, the Intelligence and Security Committee, 2 independent commissioners, and they must be good, Mike, because they're former High Court judges. They'll be above reproach. And so that ensures that GCHQ's activities are always authorised, necessary and proportionate. Well, we just put in there, the reality is, of course, that GCHQ and the National Crime Agency seem to be supporting a death penalty without any trial at all. I think we can just remember Guy Taylor sitting in prison at the moment, Mike. No trial for Guy Taylor, no trial for people that the British government is going to murder. So this was quite interesting. I took a little look at GCHQ's website today to find that, well, they've held a concert. This is a unique event. Catherine Jenkins came into GCHQ to entertain the staff. I'm going to say, from a military perspective, these people are in the front line, of course, Mike. They're equivalent to troops out in Afghanistan or Iraq. And the boss, Mr. Hannigan, says it's wonderful for our staff to be recognised and thanked.
Does he think he's a saint?
I have to say that I used a little bit of a artistic license there, Mike, in placing the GCHQ ring of confidence. But we're now, of course, starting to see that far from a ring of confidence, there's a lot of bad breath going on in this organisation. So let's have a look at how it works. Well, SOCA, which was originally there to look at organised crime, morphed into the National Crime Agency, sucked in a lot of power. Here's the head lady, Lynn Owens, former police officer. Has had quite a varied career, but we could ask, how was she actually selected to take on the National Crime Agency? She's helped by this guy, looks more of a heavyweight, David Armand. He's Director General of the National Crime Agency. And their job is to disrupt and bring to justice those serious and organised criminals who present the highest risk to the UK. Personally, Mike, I'd start looking in the government, but they seem a bit immune to that because, of course, this lady is reporting directly to Theresa May, and she's going to be reporting to the very David Cameron who was prepared to lie about what they were doing in the first place. A little bit of cynicism creeping into this report. Well, here he is with the ring of confidence again, the director of GCHQ. So it's now been revealed that working with the National Crime Agency and through Philip Hammond as Foreign Secretary, this is part of the network that says we can track down individuals in other nation states, simply decide that they're going to be murdered, and then we authorise them being liquidated. This is Britain. Let's add a little bit to that. So we'll bring in that as an overview and say, let us not forget that, of course, UK column highlighted that Francis Maud was boasting that GCHQ was now fully linked and integrated with the Israeli intelligence services. So we've got a couple of questions to ask here, sorry, the little dotted arrow that I've just brought in is to remind us, of course, that Britain's police have also been trained by the Israelis. We're not sure who authorised that. But amongst this merry-go-round, here are the key questions. Who's really calling the shots over unlawful killings? Is it the British government under David Cameron or David Cameron under Israel? We've no way of knowing. And we'll also say, when exactly did British Parliament vote for the integration of British and Israeli intelligence services? It's pretty incredible stuff, Mike, isn't it? When we start to look at it, it's a snake's wedding, a network for other people of who are these people, who controls them, who puts them into position, who authorised them to be able to literally murder people, not in this country, but in any country in the world they decide. A little bit more to follow through, so stay with me. We're back on this gentleman, the Deputy Director General of the National Crime Agency, former police officer, and we noted that in 2003 he headed the Child Abuse Investigation Command. Interestingly, in 2004, he was appointed head of homicide investigations for London. I'm not sure what you can achieve in 1 year in a job, Mike. It'll take you a few months to read into the job, a few months to get your feet under the table. You've got your feet under the table, and then apparently you're so good they want to move you.
Nothing is the answer to that, I think.
He could have achieved nothing.
Yeah.
And yet now he's brought across into the National Crime Agency to decide where terrorists are worldwide who need to be liquidated. Well, if you're not reassured, let's have a look at what the Met Police have said about their own work on child abuse. I was kindly provided with this Met Police report. So this is the Met Police's own slides here. Child Abuse Investigation Command. This is a brief history. There was a mission to make children safer in London. Clearly that's happened, Mike, hasn't it? This came into being post Victoria Climby in 2000. Huge dedicated police solving all the child abuse protection problems, 450 detectives, 200 police staff. I don't have an exact date on this, but clearly it is of maybe a couple of years ago. Serves Pan London and some of the police districts. A modernisation programme, and then these are the challenges apparently. It's not finding the criminals, it's multi-agency working. It's complex child abuse, Mike, a little bit difficult for the police. There's very high organisational risk, don't know what the risk to the children is, critical decisions, high profile criminal justice cases, presumably that's protecting politicians and VIPs, intense media interest, too true. Well, politicians probably get 2 mentions there. And so it goes on. They're not going to improve by catching criminals. They've got to improve recording, data, IT systems, information exchange, risk assessment, escalation and challenge, resilience, capacity, skills, training. Do you understand any of this, Mike? Because I had trouble.
Well, I understand that there's lots of activity going on there, but they're not actually doing anything.
No, this is about navel gazing and literally deciding what they're supposed to be doing. Well, they identify risk, but it doesn't actually really mention any risk to the children. But once risk has been assessed, the more substantial task is to manage it. This is encouraging. Well done, Met Police. The absence of a clear focus on the source of risk to children is important. In such situations, child protection or any form of supervision unlikely to be effective. And this is what they're going to do. So they say 9% of victims are repeat victims, and 1.3% were more than 3 times, victims more than 3 times. And then a tiny percentage were 5 times victims not. Now, I'm interested in this report, Mike, because all the evidence coming to us is the fact that what is the baseline of statistics they've used? How many abuse victims have they looked at? The reality is tens of thousands. I don't think that's the case. And most of those victims are repeat victims, but according to the police, it's a tiny proportion.
Well, I don't know how they can possibly have statistics on victims when they don't know where children are half the time, never mind whether they're being abused or not.
It's interesting, isn't it? State of affairs. Well, there we are. That was a genuine report from the Metropolitan Police themselves. If anybody in the audience today can tell us in greater detail how those slides relate to policing on the ground and catching paedophiles, we'd love to know.
Pensions. Financial Times today reporting that the US is facing a, quote, disastrous $3.4 trillion pension funding hole. And they say the US public pension system has developed a $3.4 trillion funding hole that will pile pressure on cities and states to cut spending or raise taxes to avoid Detroit-style bankruptcies. According to academic research shared exclusively with the FT, the collective funding shortfall of US public pension funds is 3 times larger than official figures showed and is getting bigger. A US Republican congressman said, "It's been clear for years that many cities and states are critically underfunding their pension programs and hiding the fiscal holes with accounting tricks." And then he went on to say, when these pension funds go insolvent, they will create problems so disastrous that the fund officials assume the federal government will have to bail them out. Or will they? Because we have long been reporting that based on our research of national and international policy documents, we expect populations to fall in Western nations, and the US without question is taking the lead, as can be seen here. Increased death rate of middle-aged Americans, and this is making the point that new statistics are showing, among other things, that white middle-class women are a target group. Well, before we mention them, we'll remind you about the heroin epidemic that's going on in the States at the moment. We've been talking about this for the last few weeks, and of course that heroin epidemic has moved out of the traditional immigrant populations in the United States to white middle class populations, and it's causing an epidemic of overdose and suicide. And this and other mainstream reports here pointing out that there are other health problems that are happening, other deaths happening. White middle class women, in this case in rural areas, they're pointing out here that in Victoria County in Texas, in 1990, they had 216 deaths per 100,000 for women in the age group of 30 to 60, and that has risen in 2014 to 583. So that's a 166% rise, and this is the same in 21 other rural counties across the South and the Midwest. The national trend, to give an example, in 2000 there were 228 deaths per 100,000 rural white women in the age group around 50 years old, and now it's 296, so that has gone up significantly as well. And it's not just women of middle age, because they're pointing out in the Lancet here that the United States is the only developed country in the world where the mortality rate for maternal for mothers or women giving birth or in pregnancy is climbing. And this, to give an impression of how bad this is, one of the charities involved in supporting these situations is looking at, I'll quote this, improving outcomes for mothers in the US as well as India, Senegal, Zambia and Uganda. So we've got the United States now lumped in with countries that have significant health issues. And so is it clearly that there's an issue with older people in the United States at the moment? And so the question is, will this pension black hole be a problem? Well, this doesn't just apply to the United States. I've shown this many times, but in this country, our pension black hole is not $3.6 trillion, it's £5 trillion. And just to give a breakdown of this is from the Office for National Statistics in 2012, and they're saying that at the end of 2010, the total pension obligations of all UK pension providers were estimated at £7.1 trillion, nearly 5 times the UK's GDP, and that comprised £5 trillion of government obligations and £2.1 trillion of private sector obligations. Now, you would expect the private sector obligations to be funded, but unfortunately, the government obligations aren't. Now, of the £5 trillion pension obligations that the government is responsible for, 3.8 trillion were state pensions, and the rest is in public sector pensions. And then on top of that, there is around £1.2 trillion, which is funded, mostly funded at least, for the workplace pension scheme. But it's the £5 trillion black hole in public pensions that is the problem. And so I'm wondering how long it's going to be before we start to see death rate statistics like those in the United States, Brian. And I think
they're coming.
I think we're already starting to see it, at least anecdotally. And as you say, we've got more on this to follow.
We've got more on this to follow because, of course, David Cameron, when he's not running an organisation to kill people overseas, is already boasting almost of his death targets for elderly people in UK through dementia and other means. Well, just in case people are unsure as to what the police believe their priorities are, major fraud or child abuse or treason or theft, misconduct in public office would probably be a good one, murder, violence. We've got some clues from our local Plymouth paper, the Evening Herald, which is saying that dozens have been arrested for begging, which is clearly, is that part of international terrorism, begging on the streets, do you think?
Must be.
Must be, I think. Well, there we are. What we're starting to see, of course, is common sense, justice, morality turned on its head. This is all part of the agenda, and it's very interesting to see the amount of I'll say, interesting news which is piling in while we wait for the EU referendum. I'd say I was delighted to return home yesterday to find that one of David Cameron's "We Should Stay in the EU" leaflets has been delivered to my house. I took a quick look at it. It's a pack of lies. It will be sent back in due course. But I note that Dave Barmby has been doing some research, and as well as challenging the EU referendum organisation, he's now pointed out that according to the EU's own rules, it is unlawful to use public money to help sway a referendum, and indeed there should be no effort to sway one side or the other. So I believe that the EU's own rules are now going to be sent back to David Cameron, but of course he's above the law, Mike.
Yes, now I had an email in a couple of days ago from someone suggesting, and thanks for the email, suggesting that people sign up to become official observers at the count. And I think this is a great idea because, as we said earlier when we were discussing Guy, what these people need to see is some action from the general public to actually hold them to account. And there may be people out there cynical about taking that kind of action, but actually it's surprising how nervous the establishment gets when they're being watched. Yes.
And we'll just say to people, if you feel that you could send Guy Taylor a postcard or write him a letter, he is in Swansea prison. We don't know his prison number at the moment, but I'm sure he would really value correspondence from members of the public who are there to support him. And as Mike has said, at the end of the day, it's beholden on all of us to stand up and be counted. As we can see, justice is nearly gone in the United Kingdom, and murder by the British government has become acceptable. It's up to us. We'll be back same time tomorrow, and we will be joined by Alex Thompson from Eastern Approaches. We will see you then. Bye-bye.